It's a common question on my channel about which I like better between baseball and football, and now I'm going to answer it after doing some deep analysis and some deep thinking about this one. The real answer for me personally is that I find it very difficult because these were the first two sports that I fell in love with and the first two that made me a sports fan. And not only that, I fell in love with them around the same time as well. And you never forget your first as well. Unless you get married and it ends in a real ugly divorce, then obviously, yes, you want to forget about it. But enough about my potential past life. I'm going to be talking about the two sports that got me into sports and made me a fan of just the thrill of competition all around. I took looks into both sports and saw advantages and disadvantages one holds over the other, and my goodness, was it a close call. This is all opinionated, so if the final result makes you upset, then I don't know what to tell you. With that said, let's start the throwdown. This is the MLB versus the NFL on which I like better. Point number one, the MLB playoffs are better than the NFL playoffs. The MLB playoffs are handled the way that the NFL playoffs used to be handled. 6 teams per conference make the playoffs, and the top 2 seeds get the wild card off. Before, it used to be 4 teams per conference making the playoffs, and then they got the right idea with implementing the wild card round, but it was handled very poorly. Look at teams like the 2015 Pirates or 2012 Braves. Their season ended by the dynamics of the wild card. It shouldn't end with a single game, let alone by a terrible mishap by the umps. They got it right with the wild card being best of 5 in 2022 at least. In the NFL, every playoff game is single elimination, and it makes for kind of more anticlimactic games. And also, how often do you see the clear-cut favorites in the NFL make it to the Super Bowl? You know who the Super Bowl favorites are, and not to say you don't know who the World Series favorites are, but just because you have the best record doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to make it to the World Series. 2001 Mariners or 2022 Dodgers, anyone? Sure, there have been upsets in the NFL playoffs, but more often than not, the NFL playoffs are pretty predictable. As long as you make the playoffs in the MLB, you have a chance to do some damage, and if you can go toe-to-toe with the best team, I can smell an upset coming. Point number two, the NFL has a salary cap while the MLB doesn't. The biggest complaint that I see from people is that the MLB does not have a salary cap, and that's why they're not invested in it. And they do have a very valid point right there. We always see big market teams like the Dodgers, Yankees, Red Sox, etc. throw a ton of money at players because they have the money and there's no penalty for exceeding how much they spend. In the NFL, you can get penalized for going over the cap. For as great as the Denver Broncos were in the mid to late 1990s, an investigation showed that Pat Bowlen circumvented the salary cap, and Denver was fined $2 million and gave up draft picks. Playing in big markets like New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, Washington, etc., doesn't guarantee that you have the biggest names on your team. Look at the Giants, Jets, and Bears, for example. They've been rebuilding for what seems like forever, while smaller markets like Kansas City, Pittsburgh, and Green Bay have had success in the salary cap era. My bottom line for this point is that the NFL handles finances way better than the MLB ever could, from free agency, trades, contracts, budgets, etc. Imagine if the MLB had a salary cap. Would you see teams like the Yankees overspending the way that they do every year? Not likely. Point number three, the MLB has a better recovery time from losses. When your team loses in the NFL, you got to wear that for a full week. Even worse when your team is on a losing streak. It can take weeks for your team to win another game. So unless you're the 2024 White Sox, you have to deal with a loss at best for one day in the MLB. You lose a game, you play again the next day, and you can get the bad taste out of a loss washed out of your mouth in an instant. Also, losing streaks aren't such a big deal in the MLB when you really think about it. A 3 or 4 game losing streak in the MLB is just a minor setback in most cases, while in the NFL, that's a quarter of the season. That can ruin your whole season. If it's late in the season with your playoff hopes on the line in the MLB, then obviously, yes, it can ruin your season. But in most contexts, a losing streak and bad loss in the MLB aren't as detrimental in the NFL. Point number 4, the NFL has a better variety of matchups and schedules games better than the MLB does. Let's just face it, guys. Unless you're the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Boston Red Sox, or the St. Louis Cardinals, you're going to get little to no matchups that involve your team unless they're good. The Yankees and Red Sox seemingly get primetime games against each other every year. Like, I get it, it's a great rivalry, but we don't need to see it half the time they play each other in the season series. Dodgers Giants always gets a few games, as do Cardinals Cubs and Yankees Mets. In the NFL, almost every team gets at least one primetime or late game slot a season. While yes, we are tired of seeing the Chiefs and Cowboys get most of the primetime slots, at least they play worthy opponents. Overall, the NFL has done a better job at scheduling better than the MLB does. I'm not going to sit down here and complain about the MLB having games every single day, because that's how the MLB schedule's format. It's a 162-game marathon. But in the MLB, everyone plays each other. So it kind of spoils the moment of the World Series when you think about it. You got East Coast teams flying out to the West and vice versa. You got Northern teams flying down to the South and vice versa, and, so on. Millions upon millions of miles of air travel now occur every year in the MLB. With the NFL, they've been on a rotation with the schedule every year since 2002, and they've done a great job with it. Games can be flexed off of prime time. We get matchups involving up-and-coming teams. Every Sunday is organized perfectly, and the NFL does a pretty solid job with Sunday and Monday night matchups as well. With the MLB, we almost never see that. It's just the usuals most of the time. The only thing that I don't like about the NFL scheduling is that the 17-game season got implemented, but at least you get a different variety of matchups in the NFL. Point number 5, the MLB handles injuries better than the NFL does. When a player gets hurt in the MLB, they get evaluated, and then depending on the severity of the injury, they get put on IL. They can stay on there between 10 to 60 days, and they have to spend at least that amount of time on the IL before they're eligible to play again. In the NFL, when an injury happens, they get evaluated, most players get an MRI, and then either the coach comes out and says the extent of it, or we get updates as the week goes by. Yes, it may seem different now, but how often have we seen teams try and put their star players who are injured in a game when they're not 100%, only for them to further injure themselves? Way too often. You just don't see that in the MLB unless you know for sure the severity of the injury can be played through. While it sucks to potentially lose your ace for the whole season because of Tommy John or a star player missing most of, if not all of the season because of a torn ACL, at least you know they'll be healthy again to play at some point. In the NFL, a player can miss significant time, but it can be week to week or game time without knowing for sure if they're good to play. Plus, we get the annoying fans in the NFL who downplay wins because someone gets hurt. Which actually leads me to my next and final point about the MLB. Point number 6, there's no I in team. You only won because so-and-so was hurt. Well, if this guy didn't get hurt mid-game, you wouldn't have won. Yeah, aren't you sick and tired of those stupid fans that make assumptions in the NFL and saying that a win is meaningless? You do not get that in the MLB. Injuries are a byproduct of the game. You win and lose as a team. Tell me this. How am I supposed to blame the quarterback for when his team loses when he throws for 450 yards and 5 touchdown passes, but the opponent wins like 40 to 35? Does the QB play defense or something? Everyone loves blaming the quarterback for losses and praising the QB for wins when there's a lot of context for how often the team wins and loses. Think of all the times the Dallas Cowboys lost with Tony Romo. The Packers lost with Aaron Rodgers, the Colts lost with Peyton Manning, or the Saints lost with Drew Brees. Everyone pinned the loss on the QB when more times than not, it was the defense, drop passes, and the O-line letting them down. In baseball, everyone wins and loses as a team. It's a team failure, and very rarely does the loss get pinned on one player. Best example here, the 1986 World Series. Everyone remembers Bill Buckner botching a simple grounded at first that would have sealed the win for Boston, But the fact is, he should never have been in that position because Boston's bullpen imploded before that. Does it mean Boston wins if the bullpen doesn't choke? No, we don't know that. But what is true is that if the bullpen didn't blow the game, that error by Buckner is just a regular fielding error. When a pitcher loses a decision like 2-1, is it his fault for losing when he gave the team 6 strong innings, allowed the runs, but also struck out 8 batters and allowed just 5 hits? That's why pitcher win-loss records and QB win-loss records are easily the most overrated stats in sports. You can put blame on players as a part of the reason for why a team lost and praise a player for a great performance in a win, but in case you haven't noticed, wins and losses and championships, no less, are won by teams. It's a 40-man roster in the MLB and a 53-man roster in the NFL. So stop acting like one guy does it all on his own. Point number 7, the NFL's clock. Yes, I have grown accustomed to the MLB's pitch clock, but to me, the MLB was meant to be long. That's why there's a 162-game season and it spans 6 to 7 months. It's a marathon, as I said earlier. But I can see why people love the pitch clock because a baseball game before could easily exceed 3 hours long. The NFL never had this problem. It's always 15 minutes a quarter and has a play clock. If you don't get a playoff in time before the play clock hits 0, you get penalized for it. Same goes for the MLB if a pitcher or batter isn't ready by the time the pitch clock hits 0. But 2 things. This increases pitchers' chances of throwing out their arm, and now Tommy John isn't so much of a fear, it's an expectation. And 2, they have different times for the pitch clocks. Personal opinion, it should be set to 1 time like the play clock in the NFL is. The only time now NFL or MLB games get dragged on is because of a delay or play reviews. So while I like the way the MLB corrected this problem, it should never have been a problem in the first place, whereas the NFL had it right the whole time. And finally, point number 8, the NFL has better rivalries. The NFL is, or at the very least was, a physical sport, so it makes better storylines for rivalries. Think of some of the best rivalries in NFL history. Bears, Packers, Steelers, Ravens, Eagles, Cowboys, 49ers, Rams, just to name a few historical ones. How about some of the current ones? Chiefs, Bills, Packers, 49ers, Ravens, Bengals, Eagles, Commanders. You get it. The NFL is always spawning new rivalries and respawning older ones, and they get plenty of hype, and it's usually not just the same teams. How about some MLB rivalries? Red Sox, Yankees, Cardinals, Cubs, Dodgers, Giants. Sure, I mean, you get Dodgers, Padres, Cubs, Brewers, Yankees, Astros as well, but notice how they all involve the same teams. MLB rivalries just don't hit the same way that NFL rivalries do unless the teams are really good. Not to say I don't enjoy them, because I do, but if I had to pick which sport does rivalries better between the two, it's the NFL. So as you can see, I just went over my personal thoughts about the two sports, and basically they hold up and they compare and contrast each other very well in different ways. So overall, if I had to pick between the two, it is a very tough call because, like I said in the beginning of the video, these are the two sports that I first fell in love with. It was a very difficult decision, but I decided that after much analysis, the MLB wins by the slimmest of margins. The more enticing playoff races, not having to deal with a loss for as long, the teamwork and camaraderie, and the overall traditions will always be close to my heart. Not to say the NFL doesn't have those things, and it certainly does do things better than the MLB does, balancing a budget, schedule construction, having to be able to make corrections on a moment's notice, and having its own history as well are riveting and enjoyable as well, but more drama, more bias, and a less exciting playoff race are my deciding factors. I love the NFL, but let me put it this way. I'd feel safer bringing my wife and kids to a baseball game than I would an NFL game.